My brother stole my emergency renovation cash to buy our dad a luxury watch, claiming he earned the money through investments. Everyone praised his generosity while I sat silently, fighting back tears. I didn't scream. Instead, I used my forensic accounting skills to ensure his inevitable downfall was absolute. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The nausea hit me before the realization did. It was a physical blow, a sudden hollowing out of my stomach that had nothing to do with the flu that had been nagging at my joints for the last 3 days. It was the specific, acidic sickness of panic. I was standing in the center of my home office, a room that was usually a sanctuary of order and precision. As a forensic accountant, my life was built on lines, grids, and verifiable data. Everything had a place. Every variable was accounted for. But right now, the room looked like a hurricane had touched down specifically on my mahogany desk. Drawers were pulled out, hanging precariously from their tracks. Files were spilled across the floor, a sea of manila folders and white paper. My hands were trembling, actually shaking, as I lifted the heavy, leather-bound planner for the 4th time, praying to a god I hadn't spoken to in years that the thick white envelope would magically materialize beneath it. It didn't. No, 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 I whispered, the words tripping over themselves. It has to be here. I put it here. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing my brain to replay the memory. It was Tuesday, 2 days ago. I had gone to the bank specifically to withdraw $3,000 in cash. It was for the contractor, Mr. Henderson, who was scheduled to start the emergency repairs on my subfloor the day after Christmas. He had offered a significant discount for cash, and given how tight my budget had become after the divorce, I had jumped at the chance. I could remember the teller's face, Mrs. Gable, with her festive reindeer brooch. I remembered the crisp feel of the bills, 3 stacks of 10 $100 bills. I remembered sliding them into the bank envelope, then placing that envelope inside my purse. I drove home. I walked into this office. I unlocked the bottom drawer of the desk, the one with the false bottom I used for petty cash, and I placed it there. I knew I did. I knew it with the same certainty that I knew my own name. And yet the drawer was empty. I sank to the floor, the carpet rough against my palms. $3,000. To some people, that might be a vacation. To me, right now, it was the difference between having a safe floor to walk on and having a hole in my living room. But it was more than the money. It was the violation. I hadn't been robbed, I knew that. There was no broken glass, no forced entry. The alarm system hadn't been triggered. The front door was locked tight. My mind raced, frantically searching for alternative explanations, trying to gaslight myself into relief. Did I move it? Did I hide it too well? Did I sleepwalk? Then a memory flickered, a shadow at the edge of my consciousness. Yesterday afternoon. My brother Julian had stopped by. He had come over unannounced, as he often did, claiming he wanted to check in on his big sis because he heard I was under the weather. I had been lying on the sofa, wrapped in a duvet, drifting in and out of a feverish nap. I remembered him making tea. I remembered him wandering toward the back of the house to use the bathroom. The guest bathroom is in the hallway. My office is right next to it. I shook my head, physically trying to dislodge the thought. No, not Julian. Julian was a lot of things. He was irresponsible, yes. He was vain, absolutely. He was currently between opportunities, which was his preferred euphemism for being unemployed for the 3rd time in 2 years. But he wasn't a thief. He was my brother. We had grown up sharing cereal bowls and fighting over the remote. He wouldn't steal $3,000 from me, especially knowing how much I was struggling with the house repairs. "You're being paranoid, Alina," I said aloud, my voice sounding thin and weak in the messy room. "You misplaced it. You're sick, you're stressed, and you put it somewhere stupid." I checked my watch, 5:45 p.m. I was supposed to be at our parents' house for the annual pre-Christmas dinner in 45 minutes. My mother had been texting me since noon, reminding me that this was a crucial family bonding moment, especially since Dad had officially retired last month. I couldn't go. I couldn't sit there and eat roast beef while my mind was tearing itself apart over the missing money. I reached for my phone to cancel, to tell them the flu had won. But then another text popped up. It was from Julian. "Can't wait to see you, Tonic. HTL big night. Finally going to make the old man proud. You better be there." Something about the text made my stomach turn over again. Make the old man proud. Julian had been desperate for Dad's approval his entire life, constantly chasing get-rich-quick schemes to prove he was just as successful as I was. I stared at the phone. If I stayed home, I would tear the drywall down looking for that envelope. I would drive myself insane. I needed to clear my head. Maybe seeing them, being in the warmth of the family home, would calm me down. Maybe Julian would act completely normal, and I would realize how awful I was for even suspecting him. I stood up, my knees popping. I quickly shoved the files back into the drawers, no time to organize them now, and ran a brush through my hair. I applied enough concealer to hide the dark circles under my eyes, threw on a red sweater that felt festive even though I felt like a funeral, and walked out the door. The drive was a blur of Christmas lights and red taillights. The radio blasted Jingle Bell Rock, and I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. $3,000. $3,000. The number looped in my head like a cursed mantra. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, the house was glowing. It was a beautiful two-story colonial that my father had worked 40 years to pay off. Wreaths hung from every window. It looked perfect. I walked inside, shaking the snow off my boots. The smell of rosemary and garlic hit me instantly, Mom's signature roast. "There she is," my father boomed from the living room. Robert looked good, relaxed. Retirement suited him. He was holding a glass of scotch, his face flushed with warmth. The forensic genius finally descends from her ivory tower. He pulled me into a hug. He smelled of pine and expensive peat. "Hi, Dad," I managed, my voice sounding strained even to my own ears. "You look pale, Ellie," my mother, Margaret, said, appearing from the kitchen wiping her hands on an apron. She touched my forehead with the back of her hand. "Still fighting that bug?" "Yeah," I lied, "just a lingering headache." "Well, come sit. Julian is already pouring drinks. He's in a mood tonight, let me tell you, exuberant." I walked into the living room, and there he was. Julian was standing by the fireplace, leaning one arm on the mantel in a pose that looked rehearsed. He was wearing a new suit, a sharp, navy blue cut that fit him perfectly. He looked like $1,000,000. Or, at the very least, he looked like someone who hadn't been borrowing gas money from me 2 weeks ago. "Alina," he shouted, raising a crystal tumbler. "The prodigal sister returns." "Nice suit," I said, my eyes scanning him. I couldn't help it. It was professional habit. The fabric was high quality. The shoes were leather, brand new. "Did you get the job at the brokerage?" He laughed, a sharp barking sound. "Brokerage? Please, I'm thinking bigger than a 9 to 5, Alina. I told you my crypto plays were going to pay off." Nobody listened, but hey, results speak for themselves. My father beamed. "The boy's finally hit his stride, Ellie. He's been telling me about the market all night. I don't understand half of it, but it sounds impressive." I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. Julian didn't know the first thing about crypto. Last month, he thought blockchain was a type of fence. "Is that so?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "That's great, Julian." "It is great," Julian said, his eyes glittering. "But enough about work. Tonight is about family. Come on, let's eat. I want to get to the gifts." Dinner was an exercise in torture. I pushed potatoes around my plate, listening to Julian regale the table with vague stories of high-yield assets and leveraging volatility. Every time I asked a specific question, "Which exchange are you using?" or "What's your tax liability on those gains?" he would wave a hand dismissively. "Always the auditor, right, El?" He'd chuckle. "Don't bore Mom with the details, it's handled." Finally, the plates were cleared. My mother brought out a tray of coffee and pie. "Okay," Julian said, standing up and clapping his hands together. "Official business time. I know we usually wait until Christmas morning for gifts, but I couldn't wait. This year has been special. Dad retiring, me finally breaking through. I wanted to mark the occasion." He reached behind the sofa and pulled out a small, square box wrapped in silver paper. My heart stopped. He walked over to Dad, his chest puffed out. "Dad, you've worked hard your whole life. You put food on the table, you put us through school, you sacrificed a lot. I know I haven't always been the easiest son. I've made mistakes." My mother sniffled, reaching for a napkin. "Oh, Julian." "But," Julian continued, his voice dropping to a theatrical register, "I wanted to show you that I'm stepping up. I'm the man you raised me to be. Open it." Dad set his scotch down. He looked genuinely touched. He took the box, his large, calloused hands fumbling slightly with the ribbon. He tore the paper away to reveal a black, leather-textured box. He opened the lid. A collective gasp went up from the table. Even I gasped, though for a very different reason. Resting on the velvet cushion was a watch. It wasn't just any watch. It was a vintage-inspired Tag Heuer chronograph with a blue dial. I knew watches. Dad had admired this specific model in a magazine 3 months ago. "My God," Dad whispered. He lifted it out, the metal gleaming under the chandelier light. "Julian, this is too much." "Nothing is too much for you, Pop," Julian said, beaming. "Try it on." Dad clasped it around his wrist. It fit perfectly. Tears were actually standing in his eyes. "I don't know what to say. This is incredible." "It's stunning," Mom said, reaching out to touch Julian's arm. "I'm so proud of you, honey." "How much?" I asked. The room went silent. The warmth evaporated instantly. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me. My father looked confused. My mother looked horrified. Julian looked watchful. "Excuse me," Julian said, his smile tight. "I asked how much it was," I repeated, my voice steady despite the thumping in my chest. "It's a beautiful watch, Julian. I'm just curious. That's a serious timepiece." "Alina," Mom hissed, "that is incredibly rude." "No, it's okay, Mom," Julian said, stepping in with a magnanimous wave of his hand. He looked at me, a challenge in his eyes. "It wasn't cheap, sis, but quality never is. Let's just say it cost about $3,000, give or take." The world tilted on its axis. $3,000. $3,000. The exact amount in the envelope. The exact amount missing from my drawer. The exact amount he would have found if he had snooped while I was sleeping yesterday. I looked at the watch. I looked at Julian's smug, triumphant face. I looked at my parents, who were gazing at him like he was the second coming of Christ. $3,000, I echoed, feeling the blood drain from my face. "Family helps family, right?" Julian said, winking at Dad. "That's what you always taught us." My father raised his wrist, admiring the light catching the crystal. "You're a good son, Julian, a damn good son." Everyone applauded. My mother clapped, tears streaming down her face. Dad clapped, shaking his head in wonder. Julian bowed slightly, soaking it in. I sat there, frozen. I looked at my brother, and for the first time, I didn't see the annoying younger sibling. I saw a predator. He hadn't just stolen my money. He had stolen my labor, my security, and my peace of mind, and he had wrapped it in silver paper to buy our father's love. I forced the corners of my mouth up. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done physically. I stretched my lips into a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Wow," I said softly, "that is truly remarkable, Julian." I smiled because if I didn't smile, I was going to vomit on the tablecloth. But mostly, I smiled because beneath the shock and the hurt, a cold, hard gear had just engaged in my brain. The sister was gone. The forensic accountant had just clocked in. And I knew something Julian didn't. He thought cash was untraceable. He thought he was smart, but he was an amateur playing a professional's game. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. It was a rot that had started in the heart of this family, and I was the only one with the scalpel to cut it out. The applause eventually died down, but the air in the room remained thick with adoration for Julian. He was basking in it, physically expanding in the chair as he poured himself another glass of wine. My father's expensive reserve stuff, I noted, which Dad usually guarded like the Holy Grail. Tonight, though, Julian could have set the curtains on fire, and Dad would have called it festive mood lighting. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, gripping my napkin so tightly I could feel the fibers straining. I felt feverish, a hot flush crawling up my neck that had nothing to do with the flu. It was rage. Pure, unadulterated rage mixed with a profound sense of isolation. "Here, let me see it again," Mom cooed, reaching for Dad's wrist. "It's just so heavy, you can feel the quality." "It's a tag," Julian said, tossing a grape into his mouth. "Swiss engineering. I wanted the best for the old man. I was telling my guy at the shop, don't show me the entry-level stuff. Show me what a CEO wears." "Your guy at the shop?" I asked. My voice was quiet, almost conversational. I was testing the waters. "I didn't know you had a watch guy." Julian's eyes flicked to me. For a microsecond, the mask slipped, just a tiny twitch of irritation at the corner of his mouth. "You make connections when you move in high-level circles, Alina. You wouldn't understand. Your world is all spreadsheets and tax codes. My world is about relationships." "Right," I said, "relationships." "Don't be jealous, Ellie," Dad chided gently, though the sting was real. He was admiring the watch again. "Your brother has finally found his footing. We should be celebrating him." "I am celebrating," I said, taking a sip of water to wash down the bile in my throat. "I'm incredibly impressed. Really, it takes a lot of resourcefulness to pull off a gift like that." Julian smirked. He thought I was capitulating. He thought he had won. "Thanks, sis. I knew you'd come around." The rest of the evening was a blur of self-congratulatory anecdotes from Julian. He spun tales of near misses in the market and inside tips he'd leveraged. To anyone else, it might have sounded impressive. To me, it sounded like a script written by someone who had watched The Wolf of Wall Street halfway through and fell asleep. I watched him closely. I observed the way he avoided direct eye contact when answering specific questions. I noticed how he sweated slightly at the temples despite the room being cool. I watched his hands, fidgety, constantly touching his face, his tie, the wine glass. These were the tells of a man who was performing, not existing. But the most damning evidence was the timeline. I did the mental math as they ate dessert. I had withdrawn the money Tuesday morning. Julian had visited Tuesday afternoon. Today was Thursday. He had turned $3,000 of my cash into a watch within 48 hours. The sheer audacity of it made me feel lightheaded. He had walked into my home while I was sick and sleeping, rifled through my private desk, found the hidden drawer, which meant he had been snooping for a long time, or he had watched me use it before and taken everything. He didn't leave a 20 for gas. He didn't leave half. He took every single bill. And then, the coup de grace. He used it to buy the one thing that would guarantee our parents would defend him if I ever accused him. If I spoke up now, if I slammed my hand on the table and screamed, "He stole that money from me," what would happen? I looked at my mother's tear-streaked, happy face. I looked at my father's swelling pride. They would hate me. They would see me as the jealous, bitter sister trying to ruin Julian's big moment. They would ask for proof. And what proof did I have? A missing envelope. A withdrawal slip that proved I had money, but not that Julian took it. He had weaponized their love against me. It was tactical genius, in a sick, twisted way. "Alina, you haven't touched your pie," Mom said, breaking my trance. "I'm not feeling well, Mom," I said, standing up. The room swayed slightly. "I think I need to go. The flu is kicking back in." "Oh, sweetheart," she said, her concern genuine but distracted. "Of course, go get some rest. Julian, walk your sister to the car." "No," I said too quickly. "No, I'm fine." "Nonsense," Julian said, leaping up. "I'll walk you out, gentleman's duty." He walked me to the driveway, the gravel crunching under our feet. The cold air was a relief, biting at my flushed cheeks. When we reached my car, he leaned against the driver's side door, blocking my path. He crossed his arms, that arrogant smirk playing on his lips. "You were pretty quiet in there, Elle," he said softly. "I'm sick, Julian." "Yeah, you look sick, you look stressed." He leaned in closer, his cologne overpowering. "You should take better care of yourself, maybe get your house in order, you know." My breath hitched. Get your house in order. It was a double entendre, and we both knew it. He was telling me he knew, he was taunting me, he was daring me to say it. I looked him dead in the eye. I wanted to punch him. I wanted to scratch that smug look off his face, but I didn't. Violence is the recourse of the desperate, and I wasn't desperate anymore. I was calculating. "I'm working on it," I said, my voice icy. "Enjoy the night, Julian, you really earned it." He laughed, pushed off the car, and patted the roof. "Drive safe, sis." I got in, locked the doors, and drove away. I didn't cry on the way home. The tears had evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. When I got back to my dark, silent house, I didn't go to bed. I walked straight to my office. I ignored the mess on the floor. I sat down at my desk and turned on my computer. The blue light of the monitors illuminated the room. I pulled a fresh notepad from the drawer. At the top, I wrote, "Subject, Julian." I started listing everything: the date of the theft, the time of his visit, the cost of the watch. Then I stopped. I stared at the blinking cursor. Julian thought cash was king. He thought that because he took physical bills, there was no paper trail. He thought he had committed the perfect crime because he had removed the evidence from my possession. But he had forgotten who I was. I spent my days tracking funds through shell companies, offshore accounts, and layered trusts. I found money that cartels tried to hide. I found assets that billionaires buried. And Julian was lazy. He had forgotten one crucial thing: you can steal cash, but you can't spend it without leaving a footprint. To buy a $3,000 watch from an authorized dealer, which he would have done, because he needed the box and papers to impress Dad, he would have had to fill out a transaction record if he paid in cash. Or, more likely, he didn't pay in cash directly. He would have deposited it first to use a debit card, or he would have bought a prepaid card, or he would have engaged in some other transaction to make the purchase look legitimate. And Julian was on my family phone plan. He shared my Netflix password. He used my old laptop that I had given him 2 years ago, a laptop that I suddenly remembered was still synced to my cloud account for backup purposes that I had never bothered to disable. I opened the cloud dashboard. Last sync 2 hours ago. I cracked my knuckles, the sound loud in the quiet room. "Okay, little brother," I whispered to the screen. "Let's see where you've been shopping." He wanted to play Family Helps Family. Fine, I was about to help him right into a jail cell. The morning after the dinner, the silence in my house was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic humming of the refrigerator and the pounding in my own temples. I hadn't slept. Not really. I had spent the hours between 2:00 a.m. and sunrise lying in the stiff, frozen posture of a corpse, staring at the ceiling, letting the events of the previous evening replay in a torture loop. Family helps family. The phrase tasted like ash in my mouth. It was a weaponized platitude, the kind of sentence that sounds noble on a Hallmark card, but in the context of the Reynolds family, was actually a binding contract of servitude. I dragged myself out of bed, my limbs feeling heavy, weighted down by a cocktail of lingering flu symptoms and depression. I made coffee, strong, black, bitter, and stood by the kitchen window, looking out at the gray, slushy street. My mind drifted back, inevitably, to the history of helping. This wasn't the first time. It was just the first time he had stolen directly from my home. I remembered when I was 24 and Julian was 20. I was 2 years into my career, saving every penny for a down payment on a condo. Julian had called me at 3:00 a.m., sobbing. He had borrowed a friend's car and wrapped it around a telephone pole. He was unhurt, but the car was totaled, and he didn't have a license. "Please, Ellie," he had begged, his voice cracking. "If Dad finds out, he'll kill me. He'll cut me off. You have to help me pay the guy off before police get involved." I paid $5,000, my entire down payment fund. I ate ramen for 6 months to build it back up. When I told my mother years later, she had sighed and said, "Well, thank goodness you were there to protect him. He's so sensitive, Alina. He couldn't have handled the shame." Then there was the investment in the nightclub when he was 25. The misunderstanding with the landlord when he was 28. The gambling debt, the high-stakes poker mishap when he was 30. Every time I was the safety net. I was the fixer. I was the one who wrote the checks, smoothed over the legalities, and buried the bodies, metaphorically speaking. And every time Julian would hug me, tears in his eyes, promising to pay me back, promising to change. And then, at the next family gathering, he would be the star, the charismatic adventurer, while I was just Alina, reliable, boring, solvent Alina. But this, stealing my renovation money, while I was sick, this was a predatory escalation. This wasn't a mistake, it was a harvest. I needed to see the dynamic in the cold light of day. I needed to see who was pulling the strings, because Julian, for all his faults, was usually lazy in his malice. This level of coordinated theft, the timing, the immediate conversion of cash to a status symbol, felt directed. I showered, scrubbing my skin until it was pink, trying to wash off the feeling of violation. I dressed in my armor, a sharp charcoal blazer, dark jeans, and boots. I wasn't going as the sick daughter today. I was going as the auditor. I drove to my parents' house around noon. I knew Julian was staying there, temporarily, while he looked for a new apartment, until he found a girlfriend to move in with. When I pulled up, I saw a car I didn't recognize in the driveway. A white Mercedes C-Class, newer model, leased. The license plate frame was from a dealership in the city known for predatory lending rates. I let myself in with my key. "Hello," I called out. "In the kitchen, darling." My mother's voice floated out, cheerful and bright. I walked in. The kitchen was warm, smelling of cinnamon and coffee. My mother was at the stove. Sitting at the island, nursing a mug of tea, was Julian. And next to him, picking at a plate of untouched fruit, was a woman I had never met. She was striking, in a curated, Instagram-ready sort of way. Platinum blonde hair styled in loose, beachy waves that took hours to achieve. Her makeup was flawless, contouring that sharpened her cheekbones, lips overlined in a dusty rose. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere loungewear set that probably cost more than my first car. She didn't look up when I entered. She was scrolling on her phone, her long, acrylic nails tapping a rhythmic code on the screen. "Alina," Mom turned, wiping her hands. "I thought you were sick in bed. Are you feeling better?" "I'm managing," I said, my eyes fixed on the stranger. "I just wanted to drop by and apologize for leaving so abruptly last night." "Don't be silly," Mom said, rushing over to feel my forehead. "You were ill, but look, you're just in time to meet someone special. This is Vanessa." The woman finally looked up. Her eyes were a piercing, icy blue. She looked me up and down, a quick, assessing scan that cataloged the cost of my blazer, my lack of jewelry, and my tired eyes. "So this is the sister," Vanessa said. Her voice was smoky, vocal-fried at the edges. She didn't stand up. She didn't offer a hand. She just smiled, a small, tight expression that showed 0 teeth. "Vanessa, this is Alina," Julian said quickly, a nervous energy vibrating off him. He reached out and placed a hand on Vanessa's back, a gesture that looked possessive and subservient all at once. "Vanessa is, well, we're seeing each other. It's getting serious." "Nice to meet you," I said, leaning against the doorframe. I didn't know Julian was seeing anyone. "We've been keeping it low profile," Vanessa said, turning her attention back to her fruit. "Julian has so many distractions. I told him he needed to focus if he wanted to level up." "Level up?" I asked. In life, she said, waving a manicured hand vaguely. Julian has so much potential, he just needed the right guidance. I'm an image consultant. I help high-value men actualize their brand. I almost laughed. Image consultant. It was the perfect vague title for someone who preyed on insecure men with delusions of grandeur. Vanessa has been amazing, Julian said, his eyes darting between me and her. She's really helping me restructure my portfolio. She's the one who suggested the watch for Dad. She said, "You have to show them you've arrived." Is that so? I looked at Vanessa. That was very generous advice. $3,000 is a lot of money for a freelancer to drop on a gift. Vanessa's head snapped up, her eyes narrowed. You have to spend money to make money, Alina. It's about signaling. If you project abundance, you attract abundance. Julian is stepping into his power. He shouldn't be hoarding pennies like a scarcity mindset peasant. Scarcity mindset peasant. The insult was so absurdly specific, so steeped in internet, hustle culture jargon, that it clarified everything. This was the engine. Julian was the vehicle, but Vanessa was the driver. She was high maintenance, demanding, and clearly obsessed with signaling wealth. She was the one pushing him. Julian would have stolen $50 for beer. Vanessa was the reason he stole $3,000 for a status symbol. She was feeding his ego, and in return, he was feeding her appetite for luxury. And how is that going? I asked, keeping my voice light. The abundance attracting. It's going great, Julian said defensively. I have a few leads, big ones. Julian is going to be huge, Vanessa said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She leaned in toward him, running a finger down his arm. He just needs to clear out the dead weight, focus on the people who really believe in him. She looked directly at me when she said dead weight. My mother, oblivious to the tension, set a plate of cookies on the table. Isn't she lovely, Alina? And so smart. She's been telling me all about her business. She manages influencers. I'm sure she does, I said. I watched them for the next hour. I saw the dynamic play out in real time. Vanessa would make a subtle comment. Oh, this kitchen is a bit dated, isn't it? And Julian would immediately agree, promising Mom that he would renovate it for her as soon as his next deal closed. Vanessa would mention a restaurant she wanted to try, one of the most expensive in the city, and Julian would pull out his phone, presumably to make a reservation he couldn't afford. But the most chilling moment came when I went to the sink to get a glass of water. I was standing behind them. They thought I was out of earshot because the tap was running. Did you transfer it? Vanessa hissed. I told you I will, Julian whispered back, his voice strained. I just need to get to the bank. Don't make me wait, baby, she purred, her tone shifting from aggressive to seductive instantly. The deposit is due Monday. If we want that penthouse view, we need to move now. You said you had the liquid cash. I do. I have the rest of it, don't worry. The rest of it? My grip on the water glass tightened. He hadn't just stolen the $3,000, he had the rest of it. What rest? I only had $3,000 in the drawer, unless he had found something else, or unless he was planning to take something else. I turned off the tap. Well, I said loudly, making them jump, I should get going, I have work to do. On a Friday before Christmas? Vanessa scoffed. God, that sounds depressing, you need to live a little. Someone has to pay the bills, I said, looking at Julian. Right, brother. He didn't meet my eyes. He was staring at Vanessa's hand on his knee. I said my goodbyes to Mom, who was disappointed I was leaving so soon. As I walked to the door, Vanessa called out. Hey, Alina. I turned. Love the blazer, she said, her lip curling slightly. Very corporate, it suits you. Thanks, I said. Nice watch, by the way. I pointed to her wrist. She was wearing a delicate gold bracelet. It looked new. Oh, this, she giggled, holding it up. An early Christmas present from Julian, he spoils me. I walked out of the house before I did something that would land me in jail. Julian had stolen my money. He had bought Dad a watch to secure his loyalty. and he had bought this predatory harpy a bracelet to secure her affection. He was stripping me for parts to build a life he hadn't earned. I sat in my car for a moment, breathing in the cold air. The antagonist wasn't just Julian. It was the two of them, a symbiotic parasite. He was the host, feeding off my family, and she was the virus infecting him, making him more aggressive, more desperate, more dangerous. They were talking about a penthouse view. They needed a deposit by Monday. That meant they needed more money. A lot more. $3,000 wouldn't cover a deposit on a luxury apartment. Julian was going to strike again. I could feel it, and I knew exactly where he would look. I drove home with the kind of hyperfocus that usually preceded a major audit. The emotional hurt, the why would he do this to me, had been cauterized. Now, it was just data. It was just a problem to be solved. When I walked into my office, I didn't see the mess anymore. I saw a crime scene. I stepped over the piles of paper and sat at my desk. It was time to pivot. I had been reacting. Now I needed to act. I woke up my computer. The screen glowed to life. I needed to confirm everything. I needed hard evidence. Not for the police, not yet, but for me, and for the eventual confrontation. I needed to know exactly how stupid he had been. I opened the Cloud Sync folder again. I navigated to the device list. Julian's MacBook Pro. I started digging. It wasn't hard. Julian was tech illiterate. He thought deleting a file sent it to the void, not a trash folder that synced to the cloud. I went to his downloads folder first. There it was, a PDF downloaded yesterday morning. Lease agreement, the Astoria Heights. I opened it. It was a lease for a 2-bedroom apartment in the trendiest part of downtown. Rent, $4,500 a month. Security deposit, $9,000, due upon signing. $9,000. He had stolen $3,000 from me. That bought the watch and maybe the bracelet. He was still short, desperately short. I kept digging. I went to his Photos app. And there it was, the smoking gun. A photo taken 2 days ago in a bathroom mirror. It was Julian holding up a fan of $100 bills, my $100 bills. He was grinning like an idiot. The caption, which he had presumably sent to Vanessa, was still in the metadata. Secured the bag. Phase 1 complete. Daddy's gonna love his gift, and we're gonna be living like kings. I stared at the image, the arrogance, the stupidity. I took a screenshot. I saved it to 3 different external hard drives. Then I went to his messages. Since he was using my old laptop, and he had signed in with his Apple ID, the iMessages were syncing because he hadn't turned off the handoff feature. I scrolled back to Tuesday. Vanessa, did you get it? Julian got it. The old dragon was sleeping on the couch, walked right into the office. Easy. Vanessa, good, is it enough? Julian, it's $3K. Enough for the watch and a little spending money. But I need more for the apartment. Vanessa, you said you had access to the big accounts. You said you were the executor. Julian, I am. Well, I will be. I just need to get Mom to sign the transfer papers. She trusts me. I'm taking them over on Christmas Eve. My blood ran cold. I just need to get Mom to sign the transfer papers. He wasn't just stealing pocket money. He was going after the retirement accounts. He was going after the house. My parents were old-fashioned. They had a substantial nest egg, but it was all in joint accounts that were easily accessible if you had the right passwords or a power of attorney. I had set up their estate plan years ago, creating a family trust to protect them. I was the trustee. Julian was a beneficiary, but he had no control. But Julian didn't know the specifics of the trust. He just knew there was money. And if he could trick Mom, sweet, trusting Mom who thought he was a financial genius, into signing a power of attorney or a transfer authorization, he could drain their liquidity before I could stop him. He could empty the checking accounts that weren't in the trust yet. He was going to ruin them. He was going to wipe out their retirement to impress a woman who called me a peasant. I sat back, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was the turning point. If I called Mom now and screamed, "He's trying to rob you," Julian would spin it. He would say I was crazy, jealous, hysterical. He would say the papers were for investments. Mom would believe him because she wanted to believe him. I couldn't just warn them, I had to destroy him. I had to expose him so thoroughly, so publicly, that they would never trust him with a dime again. I needed a trap. I looked at the calendar. It was Friday. Christmas Eve was Sunday. He was planning to get Mom to sign the papers then, probably amidst the chaos of the holiday party. I picked up my phone. I dialed a number I hadn't used in 2 years. "Garrison Investigations," a gruff voice answered. "Mr. Garrison, it's Alina Reynolds. We worked together on the micro-embezzlement case at the textile plant." "Alina, the human calculator, I remember. You found the money in the shipping manifests. What can I do for you? Business or pleasure?" "Personal," I said. "I need a rush job, surveillance, and I need a background check on a woman named Vanessa. No last name yet, but I have a photo and a license plate number." "I can do that. When do you need it?" "Yesterday. I need to know who she is, what her debts are, and exactly how desperate she is. And I need you to tail my brother. I want photos of everything he buys, everywhere he goes." "Consider it done. Send me the info." I hung up. Step 1, gather intel. Step 2, the trap. I opened my estate planning software. I pulled up the file for the Reynolds Family Trust. Julian wanted access. I would give him access, or at least the illusion of it. I began to draft a document. It looked official. It had the crests, the legal jargon, the watermarks. It was titled Authorization of Asset Liquidation and Trustee Transfer. It looked like a document that would transfer control of the primary savings account, about $150,000, directly to Julian for management purposes. But I buried a clause in the fine print. Paragraph 14, subsection C, a clause that stated that by signing and attempting to execute this document, the beneficiary acknowledged receipt of all prior gifts as loans and agreed that any unauthorized withdrawal of funds would immediately trigger a confession of fraud and a forfeiture of all future inheritance. It was a legal bear trap. But I needed him to take the bait. I needed him to think he had won. I picked up my phone and texted Julian. "Hey Jay, I've been thinking, you're right. You have been doing great lately. I'm sorry I was cold. I'm going through the estate files this weekend to update some things for tax season. I noticed there's an account Mom and Dad haven't been utilizing. Maybe you could look at it, give them some advice." I waited. 3 minutes later, the reply came. "Thanks, Elle, appreciate that. Yeah, I'd love to help. I actually have some ideas for them. I'll be over on Christmas Eve early to help set up." I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. "Come and get it, little brother," I whispered. He was walking right into the kill zone, but I wasn't done. I needed to ensure that when the trap snapped shut, everyone was watching. I spent the next 6 hours building the case. I printed the text messages. I printed the lease agreement. I created a timeline. Then Mr. Garrison called back. "Alina, you're going to want to hear this." "What did you find?" "Vanessa isn't an image consultant. Well, she is, but her business is currently being sued by 3 different credit card companies, and her real name is Vanessa Lewis. She has a record." "A record?" "Fraud, passing bad checks in 2018. And get this, she's currently married." My eyebrows shot up. Married. To a guy currently serving time for, wait for it, insurance fraud. She's looking for a payout, Alina. She's deep in debt, and it looks like your brother is her new mark. "Perfect," I said. "Send me the file, everything." "You got it. Good luck, Alina." I looked at the stack of evidence growing on my desk. I had the theft of the $3,000. I had the intent to steal the retirement. I had the girlfriend's criminal history. I had the lease he couldn't afford. But there was one final piece, the emotional dagger. I remembered the watch, the symbol of his success. I picked up the phone again and called the jeweler listed on the box Julian had left on the table. I had memorized the logo. "Hi, this is Alina Reynolds. My brother Julian bought a tag hewer from you recently, a blue chronograph." "Yes, Ms. Reynolds, I remember him, a cash purchase." "Right, he lost the receipt, and we need it for insurance purposes. Could you email me a copy?" "Of course, I can send that right over." When the email dinged, I opened the attachment. Item tag hewer Monaco, price $3,200, payment method, cash. And there, at the bottom, a note in the customer comments section. Customer requested box be gift wrapped, mentioned purchasing with winnings from a sister's charity. He had mocked me to the salesman. He had bragged about stealing from me to a stranger while buying the gift that made my parents cry tears of joy. The last remnant of guilt I felt about destroying him evaporated. I looked at the clock. It was Friday night. Sunday was Christmas Eve, the family party, everyone would be there. Aunts, uncles, cousins. It was the perfect stage. I stood up and walked to the window. The snow was falling harder now, covering the world in white. "Enjoy your weekend, Julian," I said to the reflection in the glass. "It's your last one as the golden child." I went to bed, and for the first time in 3 days, I slept like a baby. I had a plan. And unlike Julian's plans, mine was audit-proof. Saturday dawned with a sky the color of bruised iron, a grim, heavy gray that promised a storm was coming. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. I stood in my kitchen, the granite countertops cold under my palms, staring at the document sitting in the center of the island. Authorization of asset liquidation and trustee transfer. It was a masterpiece of legal deception. To the untrained eye, specifically to the greedy, desperate eye of someone like my brother, it looked like the keys to the kingdom. It looked like permission to access the dormant funds I had hinted at in my text. In reality, it was a confession of intent to defraud, wrapped in a waiver of rights. My phone buzzed. It was Julian. "On my way, Via's coming too. Hope that's cool." I didn't smile, I didn't frown. I just felt a cold, mechanical click in my chest. Bring her, I thought. Bring the arsonist to the fire. I spent the next hour preparing the stage. I cleaned the kitchen, not because it was dirty, but because the act of scrubbing gave my hands something to do other than shake. I wasn't scared of them. I was scared of myself. I was scared of the sheer volume of rage that was pressurizing inside my ribcage. I was a forensic accountant. My weapon was silence, precision, and paper. I couldn't afford to lose my temper. If I screamed at him, he wins. If I cry, he wins. If I let him sign his own death warrant while smiling and offering him coffee, I win. At 11:00 a.m. sharp, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, smoothing the front of my sweater. I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. Neutral, calm, the face of a sister who just wants to help. I opened the door. Julian was standing there, shivering slightly in a coat that was too thin for the weather but looked expensive. Vanessa was next to him, wrapped in a white faux fur coat that made her look like a snow leopard searching for prey. She was wearing oversized sunglasses despite the gloom. "Hey sis," Julian said, stepping inside and stamping snow off his boots. He seemed jittery, his energy vibrating at a frequency that set my teeth on edge. "Freezing out there. Global warming my ass right." "Come in," I said, stepping back. "Coffee is on." "Love what you've done with the place," Vanessa said, pulling her sunglasses down to inspect the hallway. "Very minimalist, a bit austere for my taste, but it screams efficiency." "I like to keep things clear," I said. "Clutter hides problems." We walked into the kitchen. Julian's eyes immediately darted to the document on the island. He licked his lips, a quick, unconscious flick of the tongue that betrayed his hunger. "So," he said, rubbing his hands together, "you said you found some accounts. Mom and Dad have been holding out on us." "Coffee first," I said, pouring 3 mugs. I handed one to Vanessa, who looked at the liquid suspiciously, as if I might have poisoned it. Given how I felt, it wasn't an unreasonable fear. We sat down. I took the seat at the head of the island. Julian and Vanessa sat on the stools opposite me, like two naughty students in the principal's office. "Here's the situation," I began, keeping my voice low and confidential. I was reviewing the trust structures for the end-of-year tax filing. I realized that there's a secondary liquidity pool, about $150,000, that's currently sitting in a low-yield savings bond. It's essentially losing money due to inflation. Julian's eyes widened. 150. "Give or take," I said. "Dad is, well, you know Dad, he's conservative. He likes to know the money is safe. But with the market the way it is, it's negligent to leave it there." I thought, since you're so active in the investment space now, maybe you could manage a reallocation." Vanessa placed a hand on Julian's forearm, her nails digging into the fabric of his coat. "That makes total sense," she said, her voice silky. "Passive income is dead money. You need velocity of capital. Julian can definitely handle that. He's been doing amazing work with his own portfolio." "Right," Julian said, sitting up straighter. "I could put that into a diversified crypto index or maybe some short-term real estate flips. I could double it in 6 months, easily." "I'm sure you could," I said, "but there's a catch. The trust has strict bylaws. I can't just hand you the cash. We need to execute a transfer of authority. Essentially, Mom and Dad need to sign off on you acting as a temporary subtrustee." "Okay," Julian said, nodding rapidly. "That's fine. Mom will sign anything I put in front of her. She trusts me." The casual way he said it, "She will sign anything I put in front of her," made bile rise in my throat. He saw our mother not as a person, but as a signature machine. A rubber stamp for his greed. "I've drafted the preliminary authorization here," I said, sliding the document across the granite. "This allows you to take custody of the assets if Mom signs the final version on Christmas Eve. But I need you to sign this draft first, acknowledging that you understand the fiduciary responsibility." Julian snatched the paper. He didn't read it. He didn't even scan the headers. He just looked for the line that said signature. "Wait," Vanessa said, her sharp voice cutting through the air. She leaned over his shoulder. "Let me see that." She scanned the page, her eyes narrowing. She wasn't a lawyer, but she was a grifter, and grifters have a sixth sense for traps. "What's this part?" she asked, pointing a manicured finger at paragraph 14. "Subsection C, acknowledgement of prior distributions." My heart hammered, but my face remained stone. "Standard language," I said effortlessly. "It just means that for tax purposes, any money you've received from them in the past, birthdays, help with rent, the car repairs, is acknowledged so the IRS doesn't flag this new transfer as a gift. It protects the principal." "Oh," Julian said, waving a hand. "That's fine, just bureaucratic nonsense. Who cares?" "I care," Vanessa said, looking at me with cold suspicion. "Julian, don't sign anything without reading it." "Babe, it's fine," Julian said, picking up a pen. "It's Alina. She's boring, she's anal, but she's not going to screw me. She wants this money managed just as much as we do. Right, Elle?" He looked at me, a glimmer of the old brotherly affection in his eyes. It was a weapon. He was using our history to disarm me. "I'm your brother. You love me. You fix things." "I want the money where it belongs," I said. The ambiguity hung in the air. Julian signed. The scratch of the pen on the paper sounded like a gunshot in the quiet kitchen. "Done," he said, sliding it back to me. "So, Christmas Eve. I bring this to Mom, she signs, and then what? How fast does the wire hit?" "Tuesday morning," I lied. "Banks are closed Monday for the holiday." "Tuesday," Vanessa murmured. "That's cutting it close for the deposit." "What deposit?" I asked, feigning ignorance. Julian froze. He looked at Vanessa, panic flashing in his eyes. "Nothing, just a business opportunity, time-sensitive." I picked up the document and slid it into a folder. "Interesting. Does this business opportunity happen to have a view of the skyline? Maybe 2 bedrooms, a doorman?" The silence that followed was absolute. The air left the room. Julian's face went from flushed to pale in 3 seconds. What? The Astorian Heights, I said, leaning forward, resting my elbows on the island. Unit 42B $9,000 deposit, $4,500 a month. It's a beautiful building, Julian. A bit out of your price range, isn't it? I don't know what you're talking about, Julian stammered, his laugh nervous and high-pitched. You're imagining things. Am I? I reached under the counter and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The screenshot of his text, message to Vanessa, the one with the money. I slid it across the counter. Secured the bag, phase 1 complete. Julian looked at the photo. He looked at the fan of bills in his hand, my bills. He looked at the text. He didn't speak, he couldn't. Vanessa, however, didn't flinch. She looked at the photo, then looked at me, her expression hardening into a sneer. So, she said, he has cash, is that a crime? It is when he stole it from my desk, I said, my voice dropping an octave. Tuesday afternoon, while I was sick. You came into my home, Julian. You went into my office. You opened the false bottom of my drawer, and you took $3,000. I didn't steal it, Julian shouted, jumping up from the stool. The sudden movement knocked his coffee mug over. Brown leak. Id splashed across the pristine white counter, dripping onto the floor. I borrowed it. I was going to pay you back. I needed the cash for the watch. For Dad. It was for the family, Alina. For the family? I stood up slowly. You stole my renovation money to buy a prop so you could play the big shot. And then you stood there at dinner, accepted the applause, and looked me in the eye. You watched me panic about losing that money, and you smiled. You have plenty of money, Julian yelled, his face twisting into something ugly. You have this house, you have your fancy job, you have everything, I have nothing. I'm trying to build a life here, and you're hoarding cash in a drawer like a miser. You owed me that help. You owed me. There it was, the core of his entitlement, the rot at the center of his soul. I owed you nothing, I said. And the watch, that wasn't for Dad. That was a down payment on his loyalty. You bought him so he wouldn't ask questions when you drain his retirement account next week. You're crazy, Vanessa spat. She stood up, wrapping her coat tighter around her. Come on, Julian, we're leaving. She's clearly having a breakdown. This is jealous, toxic behavior. Yeah, Julian breathed, backing away. Yeah, you're crazy, Elle. I'm not draining anything. I'm going to manage it. I'm going to make them rich. You're going to make her rich, I said, pointing at Vanessa. Or are you going to pay off her credit card debt first, or maybe bail out her husband? Vanessa froze. Her hand was on the doorknob. She turned slowly, her face a mask of pure hatred. What did you say? I know about the lawsuits, Vanessa, I said. I know about the bad checks. I know about your husband in prison for insurance fraud. Does Julian know? Does he know he's just the next Mark? Vanessa laughed. It was a cold, jagged sound. Julian knows what I tell him to know, and he knows who believes in him. You're just a sad, lonely woman who can't stand to see anyone else shine. Come on, baby. She opened the door. Julian looked at me. For a second, I saw hesitation. I saw the little brother who used to ask me to check under his bed for monsters. Julian, I said softly, if you walk out that door with her, you're on your own. I won't fix this. I won't pay the bail. I won't hire the lawyer. This is it. He looked at Vanessa, waiting in the doorway like a siren. He looked at me, standing in the kitchen with the spilled coffee. You never believed in me, he said, his voice shaking with self-pity. You always thought you were better than me. Watch me, Alina. I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to be bigger than you ever were. He turned and walked out. The door slammed shut. I stood in the silence, listening to the roar of his car, engine fading down the street. I looked down at the document on the counter. It was stained with coffee, brown liquid, soaking into the corner where his signature was scrawled. He had signed it, he had acknowledged the trap. But he hadn't backed down, he had doubled down. He was going to try to get Mom to sign the real papers on Christmas Eve. He was desperate, he was cornered, and he had Vanessa whispering poison in his ear. I grabbed a roll of paper towels and started wiping up the coffee. Okay, I said to the empty room. You want to play the victim? Let's see how the jury likes your performance. I had the signature. I had the confession of borrowing, stealing, shouted in my kitchen. But it wasn't enough. He could still claim it was a family dispute. He could still manipulate Mom. I needed to nuke his credibility from orbit. I needed to show my parents exactly who Vanessa was and exactly what Julian had become under her influence. I pulled out my phone and dialed Garrison again. "It's me," I said. "I need you to find the husband. I need to talk to him, today." "He's in a minimum security facility upstate," Garrison said. "Visiting hours are until 4. It's a 3-hour drive." "I'm leaving now," I said. "Get me on the list." "Alina," Garrison's voice was cautious. "This guy is a con artist. He's not going to talk to you out of the goodness of his heart." "I know," I said, grabbing my keys. "I'm not bringing goodness, I'm bringing leverage." I walked out of the house, leaving the coffee-stained confession on the counter. The storm was starting. Snow began to swirl in the gray air, stinging my face. I got in my car and headed north. I was going to prison. The drive to the correctional facility was a descent into a bleak, monochromatic world. The further north I drove, the heavier the snow fell, turning the highway into a treacherous ribbon of white. My wipers slapped a frantic rhythm against the glass, slap-thud, that matched the pounding of my heart. I had 3 hours to think, to process the confrontation. Julian's words echoed in the small cabin of my car. "You owe me." It was the anthem of the mediocre man, the bully. That shared DNA was a credit card with no limit. He truly believed that my success was a personal affront to him, that my savings were his rightful inheritance because family helps family. It was a distortion of love, so profound it was almost impressive. But Vanessa, she was the accelerant, Julian was a spark, she was the gasoline. I pulled into the visitor parking lot of the FCI Odysville just after 2:00 p.m. The prison loomed against the gray sky, a complex of brick and razor wire that looked less like a place of rehabilitation and more like a warehouse for broken things. I went through security, the metal detectors, the pat-down, the surrender of my phone and purse. It was dehumanizing, invasive, and necessary. I carried nothing but my ID and a single manila folder containing the few scraps of information Garrison had emailed me about Vanessa's husband, Marco Lewis. I sat in the visitation room. It smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. Tables were bolted to the floor. Families huddled together, speaking in hushed tones. Then, the door on the far side buzzed open. Marco Lewis walked in. He wasn't what I expected. I expected a slick, oily conman. Instead, he looked tired. He was a man in his late 40s, balding, with the soft, doughy physique of someone who had spent 2 years eating prison starch. But his eyes were sharp. They were the same predator eyes I had seen on Vanessa. He sat down opposite me, looking bored. "Alina Reynolds," he said, reading my name off the slip of paper in his hand. "Don't know you. You're not a lawyer, you're not a cop. You dress too nice for social services. Who are you?" "I'm the sister of your wife's boyfriend," I said bluntly. Marco blinked. Then, a slow, dark smile spread across his face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who just heard a joke he'd been waiting to hear for a long time. "Vanessa," he said, tasting the name. "She's got a new one, huh? How long?" "A few months," I said. "She's trying to get him to liquidate my parents' retirement fund to pay for a penthouse. And, I assume, to pay for your appeal? Or is she keeping that money for herself?" Marco laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. "My appeal? Lady, Vanessa hasn't sent me a dime since I got locked up. She sold my car. She sold my watch. She maxed out my cards and then filed for identity theft claiming I did it. She's telling my brother she's an image consultant," I said. "She says she's helping him level up." "She's a vampire," Marco said, leaning forward. His demeanor shifted. The boredom was gone, replaced by a simmering, focused vindictiveness. "She finds guys who are hungry, guys who think they deserve more than they have. She whispers in their ear, tells them they're kings, tells them everyone else is holding them back. Then she bleeds them dry. She's trying to get him to sign a lease for $9,000 on Monday, I said. She needs 12, Marco corrected. I paused. Excuse me. She needs 12,000, Marco said. She owes a loan shark in Jersey 12,000. A guy named Sal, nasty piece of work. She borrowed it to try and launch some lifestyle brand that failed. Sal doesn't care about branding. He cares about his money. If she doesn't pay him by the first of the year, she's in trouble. The puzzle pieces slammed together. The urgency, the pressure on Julian, the deposit that was oddly high. It wasn't just for an apartment. It was to save her own skin from a loan shark. She's using my brother to pay off a shark, I whispered. Bingo, Marco said. And when the money runs out, she'll dump him, or worse, she'll set him up. She set me up. The insurance fraud, that was her idea. I signed the papers, she took the check, I took the fall. She testified against me for a reduced sentence on her own charges. I stared at him. This was worse than I thought. Julian wasn't just being scammed, he was being groomed to take a fall for something. If he moved that money, and if things went south, Vanessa would make sure Julian was the one holding the bag. I need proof, I said. I need something I can show my family. They think she's a saint. They think she's helping him. Marco looked at me. He tapped his fingers on the metal table. What's in it for me? He asked. I'm in here for another 18 months. I can put $500 in your commissary account today, I said. And I can promise you that when I take her down, I'll make sure her involvement in your case gets a second look by the DA. I know people. Marco considered this. He nodded. She writes letters, he said, to me, taunting me, telling me how stupid I was. She sent me one last week, bragging about the new Mark, said he was a golden retriever with a credit card. Said his family was soft. My blood boiled, soft. Do you have the letter? It's in my cell, he said, but I can mail it to you, or you can ask the guard to photocopy it. It's considered contraband I bring it out, but if you request it as legal discovery material, or if you just grease the right palm. I didn't grease palms, but I did know how to ask for things. 30 minutes later, I walked out of the prison with a photocopy of a handwritten letter in my folder. Marco, it read in loopy, girlish script. You'd laugh if you saw this new guy. Julian, he's so desperate to be a big shot. He stole from his own sister to buy me a bracelet. Can you believe it? The parents are totally snowed. I'm going to have the deposit for Sal by Christmas. Then we're moving into the Astorian. Don't worry, I won't put your name on the lease. You just rot in there. XOXOV. It was the smoking gun. It was the nuclear bomb. I drove home through the blizzard. The roads were dangerous, white-knuckle driving, but I didn't care. I felt a strange, cold clarity. When I got home, it was dark. My house felt empty, but it felt safe. I had one day left. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve. My phone rang. It was my mother. Alina, her voice sounded strained. Hi, Mom, everything okay? I don't know, Julian was here today, with Vanessa. My grip on the phone tightened. What did they want? They were very insistent, Mom said, her voice trembling slightly. Julian brought some papers. He said you talked about them, about the trust. I did, I said carefully. I told him we could discuss it. He wanted me to sign them today, she said. He was so agitated, Alina. He was pacing. And Vanessa kept saying that if we didn't sign now, he would miss a once-in-a-lifetime window. She said you were trying to block him because you were jealous. What did you do, Mom? I asked, holding my breath. I told him we had to wait for the party, she said. I told him Dad wouldn't sign anything without reading it, and that we agreed to do family business when everyone was together. He got angry, Alina. He kicked the wall. I've never seen him like that. I'm sorry, Mom, I said, my heart breaking for her. I'm so sorry. Is it true? She asked, her voice small. Are you jealous of him? He says you're trying to sabotage him. No, Mom, I said firmly. I am trying to save him, and I am trying to save you. Please, promise me one thing. Do not sign anything until tomorrow night. Promise me. I promise, she whispered. I want everyone to be happy. It's Christmas. I know, I said. We'll sort it all out tomorrow, I promise. I hung up. He had kicked the wall. He was escalating. The pressure from Vanessa and Sal, the loan shark, was mounting. He was a cornered animal. I spent the rest of the night assembling the dossier. I had the bank withdrawal slip. I had the jeweler's receipt with the nasty comment. I had the text messages about the theft. I had the lease agreement. I had Vanessa's criminal record and the lawsuits. And I had the letter from Marco. I put it all in a sleek, black presentation folder. I wasn't just going to a party. I was going to a trial. Sunday morning, Christmas Eve, arrived with a blindingly bright sun reflecting off the new snow. It was a beautiful day, the kind of day you see in movies. I dressed carefully. I chose a deep red dress, festive but commanding. I wore my hair up. I put on my favorite pearl earrings. I looked in the mirror. Showtime, I whispered. I drove to my parents' house at 5:00 p.m. The driveway was full. My aunts and uncles were there. My cousins, it was a full house. I walked in with my black folder tucked under my arm. The house smelled of pine and roasting ham. Christmas carols were playing softly. People were laughing, drinking eggnog. And there, in the center of the living room, holding court, was Julian. He was wearing a velvet blazer. He had a glass of scotch in one hand and was gesturing wildly with the other. Vanessa was next to him, wearing a shimmering gold dress that dipped low in the back. She looked triumphant. My father was sitting in his armchair, wearing the watch. He was looking at Julian with that same adoration. "Alina," Dad called out when he saw me. Come in, come in. Julian was just telling us about his new venture. He's going to open a firm." "A firm?" I asked, walking into the room. The music seemed to fade. The chatter died down as people noticed my entrance. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I walked straight to the coffee table in the center of the room. "Yes," Julian said, his smile faltering slightly as he saw my face. "Capital management. Vanessa and I are launching it next month, once the funding is secured." "Funding," I said loudly. My voice carried to the back of the room. "Is that what we're calling it?" "Alina, don't start," Mom said, coming out of the kitchen with a tray of appetizers. She looked anxious. "Let's just have a nice night." "I agree," Vanessa said, stepping forward. She linked her arm through Julian's. "Leave the negativity at the door, Alina. It's Christmas." "It is Christmas," I said. "A time for truth, a time for family." I placed the black folder on the coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. "What is that?" Dad asked, frowning. "That," I said, looking at Julian, "is the invoice for your lifestyle." Julian paled. "Alina, stop, seriously, not now." "Now is the only time," I said. I looked around the room. My aunt, my uncle, my cousins, they were all watching. "You all think Julian is a success story. You think he's a prodigy. You think he bought that watch on Dad's wrist with the fruits of his labor." "He did," Dad said defensively, covering the watch with his other hand. "No, Dad," I said gently. "He bought it with my money. $3,000 that he stole from my desk drawer while I was sick with the flu." A gasp rippled through the room. "Liar," Vanessa shrieked. It was sudden and shrill. "She's lying. She's jealous because Julian is doing better than her." "Am I?" I opened the folder. I pulled out the first page, the photo of Julian holding the cash. "This is Julian," I said, holding it up for the room to see. "Tuesday afternoon, in my bathroom, holding my money. Read the caption, Julian. Secured the bag. Daddy's gonna love his gift." Julian looked like he was going to throw up. That was my money," he stammered. "I withdrew it." "From where?" I asked. "You don't have a job, Julian. You don't have a bank account with a positive balance." I checked. I pulled out the next paper, the jeweler's receipt. And here is the receipt for the watch, paid in cash, with a note, "Purchased with winnings from a sister's charity." He mocked me while he spent my money to buy your love, Dad. Dad looked down at the watch. His face was gray. He looked at Julian. "Son, is this true?" "She's manipulating it," Julian yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She's twisting everything. Mom, sign the papers. Just sign the papers so I can fix this. Once the deal goes through, I'll pay everyone back, I promise." He was frantic now. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the trust transfer documents, the real ones, the ones he had printed himself. He thrust them at Mom. "Sign it, Mom, please. We need the deposit by tomorrow." "The deposit for the apartment you can't afford?" I asked. "Or the deposit for Sal?" Vanessa froze. Her face went from angry to terrified in a split second. "Who?" she whispered. "Sal," I said. "The loan shark you owe 12 grand to. The reason you're pushing Julian to steal our parents' retirement." I pulled out the final piece of paper, the letter from Marco. "And this," I said, my voice shaking with emotion, "is a letter from your husband, Vanessa, from prison, where he explains exactly how you operate. A golden retriever with a credit card. That's what you called my brother." I handed the letter to my father. He read it. His hands started to shake. He read the part about the parents being snowed. He read the part about Julian stealing. The room was deadly silent. The only sound was the crackling of the fire. Dad stood up slowly. He looked older than I had ever seen him. He unclasped the watch from his wrist. He placed it on the table next to the folder. Then he looked at Julian. "Get out," Dad whispered. "Dad, wait, I can explain." Julian started, reaching out. "Get out," Dad roared. It was a sound I had never heard him make. It was the sound of a heart breaking violently. "Get out of my house. You stole from your sister. You tried to steal from your mother, for her." He pointed at Vanessa. Vanessa didn't wait. She saw the ship sinking and she jumped. She grabbed her purse. "I'm out of here. You people are insane. Julian, lose my number. You're broke anyway." She turned and stormed out the front door, leaving a trail of cold air and expensive perfume. Julian stood there, alone, abandoned, exposed. He looked at me. There was no anger left, just fear, pure, naked fear. "Elle," he whimpered, "please." "Family helps family," I said, my voice cold as ice. "I just helped you avoid a felony fraud charge, Julian. If Mom had signed those papers, you would be going to prison. Now, get out before I change my mind and call the cops for the 3 grand. He looked around the room. No one would meet his eyes. My mother was sobbing into her hands. My father was staring at the wall. Julian turned and walked out into the snow. The door closed. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolutely necessary. The silence that filled the living room after the front door slammed was not peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, and thick with the debris of a shattered reality. It was the kind of silence that follows a bomb blast, where the ringing in your ears is the only sound you can perceive. My father was the first to move. He sank back into his armchair, his legs seemingly giving way beneath him. The color had drained from his face, leaving him a terrifying shade of ash gray. He stared at the empty space where his son had sat. Ood, his chest heaving with shallow, ragged breaths. "Robert," my mother's voice was a whisper, a thin, fragile thread of sound. She was still holding the tray of appetizers, her knuckles white against the silver handles. She looked at me, her eyes wide and swimming with a mixture of horror and confusion. "Alina, tell me it's not true. Tell me he didn't. Tell me he wouldn't." I didn't want to hurt them anymore. Every word I had spoken felt like a physical blow to people I loved. But I knew, with the cold precision of my profession, that a wound cannot heal if it is not cleaned out completely. Leaving a sliver of doubt would only allow the infection to return. "Put the tray down, Mom," I said softly. I walked over to her and gently took the silver platter from her shaking hands, setting it on the sideboard. I guided her to the sofa. The rest of the family, my aunts, uncles, and cousins, stood frozen, like statues in a museum exhibit titled "The Ruin of a Family." "I wish I was lying," I said, my voice steady but quiet. I picked up the black folder again. "But I'm not. We can't pretend this didn't happen. If we do, he will destroy you. Not because he hates you, but because he is desperate and he has people behind him who are dangerous." "Dangerous?" My uncle, a stoic man named David, stepped forward. "You mentioned a loan shark, Sal." "Yes," I said. "Vanessa owes $12,000 to a loan shark. Julian promised to pay it. That's why he needed the money by tomorrow. He wasn't investing your retirement, Dad. He was going to wire it to a criminal to save his girlfriend from getting her legs broken." My father let out a sound that was half sob, half groan. He reached out and picked up the watch, the tag hewer that had been the pride of his night only an hour ago. He looked at it with revulsion now, as if it were a venomous snake coil. "He bought this," Dad's voice cracked. "He bought this with your money to trick me." "He bought it to buy your trust," I confirmed. "He knew I would notice the missing cash. He knew I would eventually say something. He needed you to be so enamored with him, so proud of him, that when I accused him, you would turn on me. He weaponized your love for him against me." My mother buried her face in her hands and began to weep. It was a guttural, heart-wrenching sound that echoed off the walls. "My baby, my poor boy, how did we go so wrong? We gave him everything." "That was the problem, Margaret," Dad said, his voice hardening. He sat up, his eyes suddenly clear and fierce. "We gave him everything, and he took it, and then he tried to take the rest." He looked at me. "The papers, Alina, the ones he wanted your mother to sign, what would they have done?" "They were a power of attorney and a transfer of trusteeship," I explained, pulling the unsigned drafts from my folder. "If Mom had signed them, Julian would have had legal authority to liquidate the main investment accounts. He could have drained about $400,000 within 48 hours. By the time the banks reopened on Tuesday, the money would have been in a crypto wallet or an offshore account, and from there, gone, untraceable." The room gasped. $400,000. It was their life savings. It was their security. "He would have left us with nothing," Mom whispered, looking up, mascara running down her cheeks. "He would have told himself he was going to pay it back," I said, trying to be fair, though I didn't feel like it. "He would have gambled it on some scheme, hoping to double it, and he would have lost it all. And then, yes, you would have been left with nothing." My father stood up. He walked over to the fireplace. He looked at the family photos on the mantel, Julian at graduation, Julian at his communion, Julian winning a baseball trophy. He reached out and turned the graduation photo face down. "He is not welcome here," Dad said, his voice booming now. "Not until he makes this right, and I don't see how he ever can." But the night wasn't over. As the family began to murmur, processing the shock, a sudden, violent pounding erupted at the front door. Bam, bam, bam. "Open the door," it was Julian's voice. It wasn't the smooth, charismatic voice from earlier. It was high-pitched, slurred, and frantic. "Dad, Mom, open the damn door." My mother jumped, clutching her chest. "Julian." "Don't open it," I commanded. I stepped between my mother and the hallway. "David, lock the back door. Uncle Jerry, check the windows." "I need my keys," Julian screamed from the other side of the wood. "I left my car keys, and I need the folder. Alina, give me the folder. You can't keep that." He didn't need his keys. He had driven away. He had come back. Which meant he had realized that the evidence in that folder, the letter from Marco, the text messages, was enough to send him and Vanessa to jail for conspiracy to commit fraud. He was panicking. "Go away, Julia." Dad shouted from the living room. "You are not setting foot in this house." "I'm coming in," Julian yelled. There was a loud crash, the sound of glass breaking. "He's at the side window," Aunt Sarah screamed. The adrenaline kicked in. The forensic accountant was gone, the protector was back. "Call the police," I shouted to my uncle. "Now, tell them we have an intruder." I ran toward the dining room, where the sound had come from. The window was shattered, shards of glass glistening on the hardwood floor. A hand was reaching through, fumbling for the latch. I grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from the dining table. I didn't want to hurt him, but I wasn't going to let him terrorize our parents. "Julian, stop," I yelled. "The police are on their way, do not come in here." The hand froze. His voice came through the broken pane, small and terrified. Please." Vanessa kicked me out of the car. She took my phone. She said, "Sal is coming for me. You have to let me in. They're going to hurt me." I lowered the candlestick slightly. I walked closer to the window, crunching on the glass. I looked out. Julian was standing in the snow, shivering violently. He looked pathetic. He looked like the little boy who used to scrape his knees. But then I remembered the text, secured the bag. I remembered the smirk. I remembered the way he looked at our mother as a signature machine. "You made your choices, Julian," I said, my voice trembling. "You chose her. You chose the money. You chose to steal from us." "I'm your brother," he sobbed. "Then start acting like it," I said. "Sit on the porch steps. Keep your hands where I can see them. When the police come, you tell them everything. You confess about the money you took from me, about the plan with Vanessa. You give them her name. You give them Sal's name. That is the only way you get any help from us. You go on the record." He stared at me, snow matting his hair. He looked at the warm light of the house, a paradise he had exiled himself from. "Okay," he whispered, slumping down onto the frozen ground. "Okay, I'll tell them." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, cutting through the crisp winter air. I turned back to the room. My parents were standing in the doorway of the dining room, holding each other. They had heard everything. They saw their son sitting in the snow, waiting to be arrested. It was the most painful moment of our lives. But as the blue and red lights began to flash against the living room walls, illuminating the shattered glass, I knew it was the only way this could have ended. The rot had been cut out. The healing could finally, slowly, begin. The days following Christmas were a blur of legal bureaucracy and quiet, somber reflection. The festive atmosphere that usually permeated the week between Christmas and New Year's was replaced by the rustling of paperwork and the hushed tones of serious conversations. Julian did exactly as I had instructed. When the police arrived, he didn't fight. He broke down. He sat in the back of the cruiser and spilled everything: the theft of my $3,000, the conspiracy with Vanessa to defraud our parents, the existence of the loan shark, and the pressure he was under. Because he cooperated, and because my parents, despite everything, refused to press charges for the attempted fraud on the estate, Julian avoided a lengthy prison sentence for the grand larceny. However, I insisted on pressing charges for the theft of my money. It was the tough love component. He pled guilty to petty larceny and was sentenced to probation, community service, and mandatory counseling. The real justice, however, fell elsewhere. Using the information Julian provided, along with the dossier I had compiled from Garrison and Marco, the police were able to track down Vanessa. She was arrested at a motel on the outskirts of the city 2 days after Christmas. It turned out Sal, the loan shark, was already on a federal watch list. Vanessa's panicked texts to him, which were on her phone when they seized it, provided the link the authorities needed to bring him down on RICO charges. Vanessa was charged as an accessory to fraud and is currently awaiting trial. She won't be wearing cashmere in a cell. But the true resolution happened inside the walls of my parents' home. 3 weeks after the incident, I went over for dinner. The house was quiet. The Christmas decorations were down. The broken window in the dining room had been repaired, the new glass clear and strong. We sat at the kitchen table, Mom, Dad, and me. There was no roast beef, no wine, just soup and bread. It felt appropriate, humble. "I want to see him today," Dad said, breaking the silence. He was stirring his soup, staring into the bowl. He meant Julian. My brother was currently staying in a halfway house as part of his probation terms. He was working a minimum wage job at a warehouse, a job I had helped him find on the Candidi. On that, his paycheck went directly into a monitored account to pay back the $3,000 he stole from me. "How is he?" I asked. "He looks tired," Dad said. "He's angry at the world. He's angry at you still. He thinks you ruined his life." I saved his life, I said. If he had borrowed that money from Sal, or if he had defrauded you, he wouldn't be in a halfway house. He'd be in a ditch or a federal prison. I know, Dad said. He looked up at me, his eyes wet. I know that, Alina, and I owe you an apology. He reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was firm, warm, and desperate. I was so blinded, he said. I wanted him to be successful so badly that I ignored everything. I ignored who he was becoming, and I ignored you. You've been the rock of this family for years. You've been the successful one, the responsible one, the kind one, and I treated you like you were just the background noise to his show. He's right, Mom added, covering our hands with hers. We applauded him for a lie, and we ignored the truth you were trying to tell us. We let him hurt you, and for that, I am so sorry. I felt a lump form in my throat, hot and tight. I had waited years to hear those words. I hadn't realized how much I needed them until they were hanging in the air. I didn't do it for the applause, I said, my voice thick. I did it because I love you, and because family does help family, but helping doesn't mean enabling, it means protecting. Well, you protected us, Dad said. The lawyer finished the new trust documents yesterday. You are now the sole trustee. Julian is removed entirely. If he wants back in, he has to earn it, and it's going to take a long time. I nodded. It was the right decision. Later that night, before I left, I went into the living room. The watch, the tag hewer, was gone. Dad had returned it. He had used the store credit to buy something else. He walked in and handed me a small box. I know you don't care about fancy things, he said, but I wanted you to have this. I opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant silver pen. It was engraved with my initials. For the forensic accountant, he said, smiling, a real, genuine smile this time. To help you find the truth. Always. I drove home that night under a clear, starry sky. The snow was melting, revealing the hard, solid ground beneath. My office was still a mess when I got home, files still scattered from the frantic search weeks ago, but as I looked at it, I didn't feel panic anymore. I felt peace. I sat down at my desk. I opened the drawer, the one with the false bottom. It was empty of cash, but it was no longer a symbol of violation. It was just a drawer. I picked up the silver pen, I opened my notebook, and I wrote a new header, Case Closed. Family helps family. Sometimes that means holding them close. And sometimes it means loving them enough to let them fall so they can finally learn how to stand on their own. I had my answer. And for the first time in a long time, I had my family back, not the illusion of it, but the real, messy, painful, beautiful truth of it.